text and values. Hopefully you had a chance to look over the Unit 1 videos, because we are going to be using and incorporating some of the techniques we learned, especially in Topic C, which was on navigation and selection techniques. But otherwise, again, this is still basic level. You don't really need to have any prior knowledge or usage of the program before following today's video. So otherwise, thanks for watching and enjoy. Okay, welcome back to another video in the Microsoft Excel 2010 basic video series brought to you by the App Trainer. Today we're going to focus on Topic A in Unit 2. It's going to be on entering and editing text and values. And if you're interested in taking the Microsoft Office Specialist exam, you'll be interested in knowing that this video it addresses topics 2.2 and topic 2.1, which is constructing cell data and applying autofill. So let's talk about just basic text and values first. To enter any type of data, whether it's a number, whether it's text, whether it's just a value, all you basically have to do is click on the cell you want to put information in, and you just start simply typing, right? So here, if I click on A1, I start typing in the App Trainer, and then when I'm finished typing in the data, I just hit enter or tab or down, and that will enter the data into that cell. Now, that's provided there's nothing else next to it, right? It displays 100%. You can see the full word. Now, let's say I were to go into cell B2 and type in today's date, which is October 11th, and I hit enter. You're going to see that it covers up whatever's in A1, right? And it doesn't mean that the text gets cut off. It's just you're not able to see it because the cell width isn't large enough. And we'll talk about how to change that again in some of the later units in the basic course. But for now, we're going to just stick to entering basic text and values. So again, simply clicking on the cell and typing will input the data. If you want to edit any of the data that's in the cell, you can simply double click on it, and that will put Excel into edit mode, right? You can tell by the bottom left hand corner again, that's on the status bar there, it tells you what mode you're in, and you'll see the cursor coming up in the cell as well. That just means Excel's allowing you to change the data that's in that specific cell, right? When you're done, you hit enter and it will go to the next cell. For those of you remembering the keyboard shortcuts, you can also hit F2 when you've selected a cell, and that will also put the program in edit mode, and you'll be able to edit any of the text in that cell. Additionally, you can click on the formula bar up here, and that will also put the program in edit mode where you're able to change whatever's in the cell. Okay, so pretty simple. Remember, as we learned in Unit 1, one click on the cell is to select it, but to actually edit it, you've got to double click the cell. Okay, so pretty straightforward. If you'd like to go ahead and follow along while I put in some data, feel free. I'm going to delete what's in A1 by simply clicking on it and hitting the delete button. And otherwise, I'm just going to put in some very generic data here of a company that I made up with some very basic data. So in B1, I'm going to go ahead and put in the name of my company. I'm going to call it Pacific Spices. Okay, and I'm just going to hit down or enter again to move to the cell below it. And in A4, let's go ahead and put in our first header. I'm going to put in month, and in B4, I'm going to put in region 1. And in A5, I'll put in the first month, January. And in B5, I'll go ahead and put in the first sales figure, which is going to be 21,000. And again, I'm hitting either tab to move the cell to the right, or enter to move the cell down after I put that data in. Okay, so some very basic data we've got in there, very simple to do. I'm going to put in a couple more lines a couple more cells worth of data here. I'm going to go into A2, and I'll give it the title Extra Sales Projections. I'll hit enter there, and let's say I wanted to change the extra sales projections to bonus sales projections for the northern region. So do you remember what the keyboard shortcut was for putting the program into edit mode? If you guessed F2, you were correct. So I'm going to hit F2, and I'll go in there and just hit backspace after the A to clear out the word extra, so I can type in bonus, and then I'll just use my arrow keys to go all the way to the end and continue typing in for the northern region here. Okay, so when I'm done, again, I will hit enter, and I'm going to just continue on and fill out a little bit more information here. Maybe in A3 I want to type in this is the final version, and I'm going to hit tab twice and maybe put in that it's confidential in C3. Okay, so very plain looking spreadsheet so far, but that's okay. We're keeping things simple here. All right. So if you wanted to delete the entire cell, so let's say, maybe I had second thoughts and I want to get rid of what's in C3, the whole cell, right? Well, instead of hitting F2 and hitting backspace over all the characters, right, that would take a while. I'm just going to click once on the cell, C3, and I'm going to just hit the delete key on my keyboard, and that will get rid of the entire cell. Okay. Now another trick that comes in very handy when you use Excel, and this is a tool we're going to be using quite a bit in the future videos, so I want to make sure you get comfortable with it and you know how to use it. This is one of the strengths of Excel. It's called autofill, and basically Microsoft Excel kind of takes a look at the data that you have in your spreadsheet and it interprets it, and you supply the program basically a range that you want the program to fill in, and Excel takes a look at the data around it and it tries to predict what data is going to fill the area around the values that you have in specific cells. So what I mean by that, let's take a look at A5, right? So I have January in A5, and let's say I wanted to type in all the month headers all the way down to D16, but I didn't want to have to sit here and go, one by one typing them all out. Well, if you look closely in a cell that you've selected, again, just by simply single-clicking it, you'll see in the bottom right of that selected cell, there's a slightly enlarged black box, right in the bottom right corner of that cell. And if you put your cursor right on top of that black box, it's going to change to a very thin plus, right? And if I were to click on that and hold and drag either to the right or to the left or up or down, you're going to see as I'm doing that, the month names are going to appear to the bottom right, and I'm going to go all the way down to A16 where it says December, and then I'll simply release the left mouse button and it fills in all the data by itself. So it predicts, okay, we started with January, and logically what would come next in that series would be February, and it's all formatted the same way consistently as A5 is formatted. So a very handy tool to use. Again, that fills in, that works with any direction, whether I'm filling up, down, left, or right. So just to demonstrate here, let's say I've got region 1 in B4. If I wanted to autofill this all the way to region 4, I can simply click on the bottom right box again, right, the autofill corner. I just drag to the right 3 cells and then release, and that gives me all the regions filled in. Okay, so one thing to be careful about though with this autofill is it only works for established patterns, right? So what I mean by that is, take a look at B5. I've got 21,000 in that cell, and if I were to try to autofill this all the way down to B16, it doesn't know what type of pattern I have going here, if I'm increasing by a certain amount or decreasing by a certain amount, right? Or if I want it to stay the same, it doesn't really know. So what's going to happen if I try to do it is it's simply just going to copy the values and fill it all the way down as 21,000. Okay, so I'm going to select the values under B5 and just delete those because I don't want all the same values there. But now let's say I have 22,000 in B6. So now I've established a pattern of values that are increasing by 1,000. So if I were to select both of these values now and then click and drag on the autofill with both of these highlighted, right, that's the key. Now as I drag down and I release over B16, it's going to increase by 1,000 because I've established an increase of 1,000 over the next 10 or 11 cells. So it's able to fill those in. Okay. Now, again, be very careful that you're actually clicking right on top of that bottom right-hand enlarged black square, because if you're a little bit off and the cursor isn't that thin plus, you're going to confuse the program a little bit, and instead it's going to do a move instead of an autofill. Okay, so be very careful there. All right, so that's your autofill. Make sure you feel comfortable doing that, because that's a technique we're going to be using quite a bit in the units to come. Okay, so another example of some of the powerful tools that Excel has to offer. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next video.
But what we first do is we're going to do some basic formula work. So I'm going to create a little table with a few names and ages, and what I now want to calculate is the average age. So you go into the cell underneath. Average is a function that Excel has by default. You highlight all the fields from which you want to calculate the average and press enter. Of course, the average, you can also calculate as the sum of all data, so we use the sum function, and divide. So we have 190 is the sum, and then we take that sum and divide by the number of observations. In our case we have 6 observations, and we of course get the same result as for the average function by Excel. So let me create another little table, again a few names with weight and height, and now I want to calculate the body mass index. The body mass index is the weight in kilograms divided by the height but squared. That's why I had the little hat to the 2, and then if you want to copy that, you just drag that file down. So here we have the body mass indices for all the people in our table. Now I want to tell you something about copying formula. There's one very important thing. So let's just copy that first formula across. Let's assume we wanted another column with exactly the same data. So we'll take that first value and we copy it across. You can see it's a different value. Why is that? Well, you can see that formula doesn't refer to the weight and height anymore, but to the height and BMI. That is because we have basically we're working with relative cell references. So when we copy that across, we actually don't want that B2 and C2 to change. In particular, we don't want the column reference to change, so therefore we put a $sign in front of the column, the B and the C. If we now copy that across, we can see that we still have B and C here, and we still refer to the same correct cells. And then we can just copy everything across, and everything refers to exactly the correct cells. Now slightly different, let's assume we want to calculate the body mass index of everyone, assuming they all have the height of Jim, 184. So as we now copy the cell down, the C2 shouldn't change, it should always be C2, therefore we put a dollar in front of the C and the 2, and then copy everything down, and this is now an absolute cell reference, and you can see that wherever we copied it, it still refers to C2. Now back to our stock data. Let's assume we wanted to work with the date, company and the close variables. It's then a good idea to copy them onto a new sheet. So we copy them on sheet 2. So we highlight column A, B and F, press Ctrl C and go to new sheet and Ctrl V to paste the data in. So that's all the data which we want. Now let's say we want to select certain subsets. We go to the data tab and click on filter, and we can see that in the top we get these little triangles in each column, and when we click on it we can use the menu which pops up to select certain subsets. So let's go to company. Let's say we only want the Boeing data, so we just select Boeing here, and what we are left with is 301 observations just of Boeing data. We could now just quickly print a line graph for these. We highlight C, go to insert and go to line graph, click, and we have a very quick graph of all the price data for Boeing over our sample period. But let's say we want a different selection. Instead of just Boeing, let's say we want GE and IBM, so we just click the two, pretty straightforward. And let's say we don't want all the data for these, but only those from 2001, say 1991 to 2000, so we go to between. We select the date here, the starting date. We can use the calendar tool, or we can just use the drop down menu to find our first observation. Let's say January 1991, that's here, and then the last observation December 2000. So we'll just need to find it here. Where's December? Here it is. Okay, and now we click OK, and now what we have here, what we can see is just the GE and IBM data, and just for 91 to 2000. Okay, so I want to show you something else, how the VLOOKUP command works. That's a very important command. We open VLOOKUP test. That's a file with two sets of data, a table with smoking and crime statistics. In each table we have data for different regions in England and Wales as well. That's the crime table, so we have different regions here as well. We have little sub-regions as well, but we are not really interested in them. But that's often the case, that you have data which you don't want. What we want is, we want to create a new table with all the regions. We want to extract the non-smoking and heavy smoking statistics from the smoking table. They're here in column C and in column I. That's the never smoking. And then we also want from the crime table, for each region we want the total proportion or rates of crime per thousand of population. That's there, robberies there, and drug offenses are there. So how do we get the data into this new table? The solution is here, and if you have the file you can look at it, but let's do it from start. So we'll use the VLOOKUP command. It's incredibly useful. If you know this command, you know so much more than most others. So go to the first cell, we type in VLOOKUP, and we want to find the northeast region in another table. Okay, so which table is that? We want to find it in a smoking table, and now we highlight the table from which we extracted. And we need to make sure that the region is the first column in that table, and that has 8 columns. We have the never smoking data, and the 8th column, the heavy smoking, in the second column. So we want the never smoking data first, and since it's in the 8th column, we type comma 8. That tells Excel to look in the 8th column, and then comma false. If you type comma false, it ensures that it only finds exact matches to northeast. Okay, so in here we have our data, and that's exactly what we want. If we now copy this down, because we want the northwest data as well, if we look at the formula, we'll see A3 changed to A4 to select northwest, but the table smoking also changes, because in cell B3 we used relative references. We want to change them to absolute references and put the dollar signs in. So we copy it again, and we can now see that the A3 and A4 still changes, but the table stays the same, which it should be, because we'll select all the data from the same table. Then we can just copy down, and we get all the non-smoking statistics for all regions. Now for heavy smoking, we basically use the same formula, just that instead of column 8 we want column 2, because that's where the heavy smoking data are. And here we go, easy peasy. About the crime data, again we look up, and we want northeast, but now we need to define a new table where to look at. It's in the crime data, so we highlight the crime table where we get our data from. It has 11 columns. That's the last column we need. The 11th, the last column in that table we don't need. Again, region is the first column. So the total crime is the second column of that highlighted table, and again we want to use false to indicate that we only want exact matches. First we adjust to absolute cell references for the table, so the crime table always stays the same where we are looking at. Okay, so let's just check that we got the right data. Northeast 62.62 per 1,000 population, so 62.2 crimes per 1,000 population. Burglaries in the 6th column, and drug offenses on the 11th column. So now we'll copy across this formula to get the burglary data and the drug offenses. So something isn't quite working yet. Let's check. Because the first cell now refers to B3 instead of A3. So we'll change it to A3. And that to A3 as well. And we need to change the columns to 6 and 11 because that's where burglary and drug offenses are. So now we got the right data for the Northeast. We just need to copy all of these down, and we have all the data but for one. Just the Yorkshire and Humber, something didn't quite work. So why is that? It worked for the smoking table, and for the crime it worked for the other region. So let's just check exactly what we are looking for. So the region is called Yorkshire and Humber in the smoking table. In the crime table, it's called Yorkshire and Humberside. Okay, so that's the problem. In merge, we are looking for Yorkshire and Humber. So it doesn't find that in the crime table because it says Yorkshire and Humberside. So we just need to change that to Yorkshire and Humber, and immediately we will have the right solution. So that's great. If you understand VLOOKUP and you need to practice, that's great.